The man's strongest memory was of a kaleidoscope, the kind you twirl and watch the colors cascade into each other. He hadn't seen one in years, not since he was a child. It was a simple toy, really, but the way the light played with the shards of glass inside had always captivated him. He remembered the feel of the plastic in his hand, the smell of the dusty attic where he found it, and the way the colors swirled until they blended into a single point of light. That memory was so vivid, it was almost a physical sensation, a warmth in his chest that spread through his body like the sun seeping through a crack in the clouds. But now, as he stared at the iron wall stretching before him, he realized that it was not unlike the kaleidoscope. It was endless, unyielding, and seemingly without purpose. He had walked for days, maybe weeks, and the wall had never changed. It was always there, a silent sentinel that blocked his path no matter which way he turned. The metal was cold to the touch, and he could feel the echo of his own heartbeat reverberate off its unforgiving surface. The wall was not a barrier to be climbed or a puzzle to be solved. It was a statement, a declaration of something's end and the impossibility of his journey's continuation. With renewed determination, the man began to search the wall, his eyes tracing the seams and rivets for any hint of an opening. And there it was, a door, hidden in plain sight, seamlessly blending with the rest of the structure. It was small, almost child-sized, with a brass knob that gleamed faintly in the fading light. The metal was warm to the touch, unlike the wall itself, and the man felt a strange pull towards it. He took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing a tunnel that stretched into the earth. The air was damp and earthy, and the walls were lined with moss that glowed faintly in the dark. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing down the narrow passageway. The scent of damp earth and decay filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the metallic tang that had clung to the outside of the wall. The tunnel curved and dipped, and he descended, feeling the weight of the earth pressing down upon him with each step. He walked for what felt like hours, the only sound the rhythmic patter of his boots against the cold stone floor. The light grew dimmer as he went deeper, until finally, the man could see nothing but the faint luminescence of the moss. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, flicking it on to illuminate the path ahead. The beam cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The man's heart raced as he thought of what could be lurking in the shadows, but he pushed the fear aside and continued on. The tunnel grew narrower, and he had to crouch to avoid scraping his head on the low ceiling. The air grew thicker, and he found himself breathing in short, shallow gasps. After what seemed like an eternity, the man emerged into a chamber. It was a small, square room with stained walls that looked as if they had once been white. A single door stood before him, its wood aged and warped, with rusted hinges that creaked as he approached. He paused, listening for any sound from the other side, but all was silent. With trembling hands, he pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit hallway with more doors lining each side. The air in the hallway was stale and thick with dust, making him cough and sneeze. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand and squinted, trying to peer through the gloom. The floor beneath his feet was cold and uneven, with cracks and puddles of murky water. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the only sound was the drip of water echoing through the corridor. The man felt a sense of foreboding, as if the very walls themselves were watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. As he cautiously moved forward, his eyes fell upon a window set into the left-hand side of the hallway. It was small and high up, but it was the first break in the monotony of the corridor. He approached it, his curiosity piqued by the hint of movement he saw within. Standing on his tiptoe, he peered through the grimy glass, his heart racing at the sight of a room with red and orange tiles, starkly contrasting the dullness outside. And there, in the corner, lurked a hideous shadow monster, its one eye gleaming with malice. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was massive, with a body that seemed to shift and change like a living blob of darkness. Tentacles sprouted from its back. The man's first instinct was to flee, but his curiosity and the strange connection he felt with this place held him firm. He wondered what it would say if he could only find the courage to ask. Perhaps it was the guardian of this realm, the keeper of secrets he so desperately sought. He took a deep breath and stepped into the room, the door creaking shut behind him. The beast's eye grew wider as it took in his presence, its tentacles twitching in anticipation. The man held out his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace. The creature's gaze remained locked on him, unblinking, as it slowly approached. The air grew colder, and the man could feel his breath condensing in the chill. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice echoing through the chamber. The beast paused, the tip of a tentacle brushing against his outstretched hand. For a moment, the man thought he felt a spark of understanding, a connection forming between them. But then, the creature opened its maw, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. The man recoiled, his hand dropping to his side. Without warning, the beast lunged at him. The man barely had time to react. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet as the creature's tentacles wrapped around his ankles, pulling him closer. He kicked and flailed, trying to break free, but the beast's grip was like iron. The room grew brighter as the creature's eye began to pulse with a fiery light, and the man could feel the heat of its breath on his face. The air around him grew electric, charged with a malevolent energy that made his hair stand on end. Panic surging through him, the man shouted, "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" His voice was lost in the creature's enraged roars. The beast's tentacles tightened, and he felt the first bite of pain as the sharp tips pierced his skin. He knew he had to act fast. With a surge of adrenaline, he reached for the flashlight in his pocket and shone it directly into the monster's eye. The creature recoiled with a high-pitched shriek, releasing its grip. The man took the opportunity to scramble away, stumbling back towards the door. He could feel the warm blood trickling down his legs from the wounds. The flashlight beam bobbed wildly as he moved, casting erratic shadows across the floor. The monster writhed in pain, giving him just enough time to slip out of the room and slam the door shut. The wood groaned and splintered as the creature's tentacles slapped against it, trying to follow. Panting, the man slid to the floor and leaned against the door, his back to the warm wood. He sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. His thoughts raced, his heart thundering in his chest. Why was he here? What did he hope to find beyond this endless iron wall? He had no answers, only the relentless pulse of the wall echoing in his mind. As he caught his breath, the man became aware of a new presence in the hallway. A shadow, detached from the wall, began to glide towards him. It moved with a sinister grace, stretching and contracting as if it were alive. The creature's cries had ceased, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate approach of the shadow. He fumbled for the flashlight, his hand shaking as he brought it up to cast light on the advancing figure. The shadow paused, its inky form coalescing into the semblance of a hand. It pointed down the hallway towards the door at the end, then gestured for the man to follow. The man's instinct was to bolt in the opposite direction, but something about the shadow's movements, the way it beckoned with a silent urgency, gave him pause. He swallowed hard, his mind racing with questions, but he knew that running would only delay the inevitable. He had come this far. He had to find out what lay ahead. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain from the tentacle wounds. The shadow waited patiently, as if it understood his fear. He took a tentative step forward, the light from his flashlight flickering as his hand trembled. The shadow mimicked his movement, gliding along the floor with an uncanny grace. The man took another step and another, his breathing shallow and rapid. The shadow kept pace, never breaking eye contact, as if guiding him through the labyrinthine corridor. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a room. This one was smaller than the last, with only a single chair in its center. It was a plain chair, made of dark wood, with a high back and no cushion. The legs were carved with intricate symbols that danced in the flashlight's beam. The man stepped over the threshold, the shadow lingering just outside the doorway. The air here was different, charged with a tension that made his skin crawl. The chair seemed to beckon him, as if it held the answers he sought. With a sense of trepidation, the man approached the chair and sat down. The moment his weight hit the seat, the room around him shifted. The walls grew closer, the ceiling lowered, and the air thickened. He could feel the wood beneath him, alive with a vibrant energy that resonated through his body. His vision blurred, and the world outside the room faded into obscurity. The only things that remained were the chair and the shadow that hovered at the edge of his perception. The shadow grew closer, its form becoming more defined, until it was no longer a mere silhouette, but a creature of substance. It leaned in, and the man felt a coolness wash over him as it whispered a single word: breath. The man took a deep breath, the air tasting faintly of metal. The walls of the room began to shiver and dissolve around him, and suddenly he was back in his own bed. the softness of the pillow beneath his head and the warmth of the blankets surrounding him, and the sun singing bright in his face.